Hello everyone. Welcome to the last CVSP 202 lecture for the semester on Dante. My title, Poetry and Eternity. Dante as representing the absolute pinnacle of the literary culture of the Catholic European Middle Ages. His subject matter, eternity, the afterlife. What's in store for us? Final things, the end. Thank you for your attention and good luck on the final exam. The end. This is what Dante wants you to think about. I'm, throughout this lecture, going to illustrate with examples of artistic work inspired by Dante's poem from various time periods. This is a lithograph by Gustave Doré, and it's one of the final visions of the poem. The angelic harmony, you can see the sort of circular roseate shape of the angels formed here around the central star, the divinity. Apprehending this scene, very shadowy, down here where I'm pointing, you can see two human figures. Dante himself, the author of the Divine Comedy, and his guide through paradise, Beatrice, about whom I won't have a chance to say very much during this lecture. You will discover Beatrice in your individual sections. So, from the end to the beginning, here is how this lecture is going to be organised. I'm going to talk about beginnings, the beginning of Dante's own poem, principally. I'm going to talk about middles, because the principal readings that you're doing in Dante are from the middle of the poem, the section called the Purgatorio. I'm going to present Dante as unifying dual principles in his art. The first, sort of at the level of content, is the unification of Christian theology and philosophy with the aesthetic values of classical antiquity, of the Greek and Roman world, which you've encountered some of throughout this course. I'm also going to talk about the Divine Comedy as a poem that balances structure, that is a sort of total organisation of its material, with narrative, and that is how it is presented in sequence, how you experience the poem in time as a reader going from the beginning through the middle to the end. That reference to how you read the poem is something I'm going to return to in a brief few comments about medieval reading practices. What was the theory of reading in Dante's own time? It's something worth knowing about because that's likely to have informed Dante's construction of the poem. It also allows you to test your method of reading as a modern reader against some of Dante's own ideas. If there's time at the end, I'll talk a little bit more about the context in which Dante was living and writing through two lenses. The lens of politics, which was very important to Dante's life, where he invested a lot of his willpower, a lot of his personal identity in the city of Florence. And yet he was exiled from Florence. He was part of a factional conflict, the result of which was that he was never able to return to the city he loved, which is a theme worth bearing in mind as we examine a poem which talks about finding one's final place. To the beginning. Midway along the journey of our life. Is the first line of the poem. Dante has the most significant midlife crisis in recorded history, because what happens midway along the journey of his life is, as he tells us very straightforwardly, he wakes up one morning in a dark wood, not knowing where he is, what he should do. What's the meaning of his life? It's all suddenly obscure and lost to him. Moreover, he is immediately assailed. His path is blocked by 3 wild beasts that threaten him with their violence. What's he going to do? It turns out that he's going to receive a lesson in the total afterlife, and he's going to get his confidence back pretty quickly, as first Virgil takes him through hell and purgatory, and then Beatrice, as we've seen a glimpse of, will show him paradise. I'm giving you Dante's biographical dates here to introduce you to a slightly hidden or esoteric theme in Dante's poem, and that is his management of numbers. You probably know the proverbial biblical saying for the length of a human life: 70 years and 10. A score is 20, so 70 and 10 is 70. So that midway through the journey of one's life, if one takes this rather literal-minded arithmetical point of view, is the age of 35. My age, as it happens. I don't think anyone in the audience is midway along the journey of their life. So certainly not Peter Shabaya. But in Dante's case, if he takes the age of 35 as midway, this brings us to the very significant and satisfying year 1300. And that is when Dante chooses to set the action of his poem, as if to give it some additional gravity. The 3 days of the poem will occur over the 3 days of Easter, year 1300. 1300 puts us in what is now customarily referred to as the Middle Ages. Would Dante have called his own period the Middle Ages? No, why not? Exactly, it's the current age, it's the present. So Middle Ages is a construct used by historians, whether literary historians or historians of political events and culture, to describe a period in retrospect. In fact, if we imaginatively place ourselves in the present that Dante is experiencing and writing in, we will find many themes that are perhaps not conveniently siloed as some aspect of a past that is over, but in fact extremely resonant. Okay, to my first pair of elements that are synthesised, that are brought together, that are made to cooperate in Dante's system, the classical and the Christian. Here are some sort of headings that are important to this aspect of culture and thought from Dante's point of view. I'll actually put both up at once just so we can see the implicit comparisons or cooperations from one to the other. The classical is associated with philosophy and therefore with reason. Aristotle, for Dante's period, is the pinnacle, the reference point for philosophical thinking. The master of those who know is the phrase that Dante memorably gives to Aristotle in the poem itself. Theology, the discourse of faith and divinity, is the other influential discourse that Dante wishes to incorporate into his poem. In particular, the theology of the Church Fathers, of whom the most influential was St. Augustine, author of Confessions and City of God. You have read selections from both of these texts in this class, or Confessions alone? Confessions alone. Nevertheless, you'll have a sense of Augustine's writing. Beneath Augustine, I've mentioned St. Thomas Aquinas, whose Summa was the leading effort of the medieval period to synthesise the thought of Aristotle with that of the Church Fathers. However, Dante is working in the medium of poetry, and so it's important to mention poetic antecedents as well. Absolutely preeminent among them, Virgil, the author of the Aeneid, the great epic of the founding of Rome by Aeneas, who of course gives his name to the title, who leaves Troy, having been on the losing side, on the Trojan side of the Trojan War, and with a band of refugees wandered the Mediterranean looking for a place to refound his community. Eventually, the place that he finds is Rome, which becomes, of course, the centre of, from Virgil's point of view, the greatest and most permanent imperial projects in human history. From Dante's point of view, a unified imperial politics is something that sounds rather utopian. The European political scene was extremely fractured during his age, and reference to Rome was just as likely to signify religious authority as political, it being, of course, the seat of the Vatican. Virgil, of course, will encounter, because in an extremely daring, it's just representative of the imaginative dash of Dante, Virgil becomes a character. This famous author from antiquity becomes somebody that Dante's avatar within the poem can have a relationship with, a discursive relationship, will learn from, be guided by, and, importantly, go beyond. Okay, I've referred to politics. Florence is going to be the key reference point there. But, you know, the violence and unsatisfactoriness of terrestrial politics, of politics on Earth, is to be contrasted with the idea, again, the reference to St. Augustine is clear, of the city of God, that is, the permanent organisation of things according to a principle of divine justice. So I guess I'm using capital letters for Virgil here to indicate the character, and lowercase for the historical author. Virgil's going to be the guide, as I have said, through Inferno and Purgatorio, Beatrice through Paradiso. Here's another illustration. Does anyone recognise the artist here, either from style or from the very fame of this slide? It's a little obscure, perhaps. Any guesses? This is William Blake. Well, I'll be showing you at least one or two more examples of William Blake. Let me ask another question. Are there any Australians in the audience? Fellow Australians? No, that's it. Oh, I was going to mention that one of the world's best holdings of Blake's watercolour illustrations is in the National Gallery of Victoria in Melbourne. So if you're going home to Melbourne for Christmas, like I am, you know, drop by and have a look at all of them all together. Here is that opening moment of the poem that I described earlier. Dante, in a bit of a panic, is facing down these three beasts, leopard, lion and she-wolf, who are blocking his path. I don't know if it's a rather static-looking picture of Dante fleeing in his red robes. Anyway, who's the figure who comes to rescue him? It's Virgil, whom Blake evidently has a very angelic vision of. I'm going to put up the rubric classical and Christian again, because when Virgil tells Dante, what you need to do is accompany me on a journey through all the three areas of the afterlife, Dante has, for him, a rare moment of modesty and trepidation. Io non Aenea, io non Paolo sono. I'm not Aeneas, I'm not Paul. In that line, Dante unites one classical and one Christian reference, very characteristically. Aeneas, as part of the story of the Aeneid, so you can see Dante, the character, is rather flattering Virgil, the character, with this illusion, visits the underworld as part of his quest to found Rome. So too, in the Epistle to the Hebrews, Paul is given a vision of the highest heavens. So Dante immediately realises the implications of being told you're going to see heaven and hell. It's like suddenly he's in very elite company. This is illustrating something else. This is illustrating the poetic impact of Dante down to this day. This is 10 more or less randomly chosen English translations of Dante made during the second half of the 20th century and the 21st century. Dante is an absolute wellspring of both visual art and new literary art. And this is just one sort of handy index of how central he remains to poetic culture. You're reading the translation of Mark Muser, I think, and there's not even space for Mark Muser on this slide. Okay, we've briefly covered the idea that the poem will synthesise classical and Christian references and ideas. How will it do it as a literary artefact, as a piece of writing? Well, through structure and narrative. Again, I'll just put everything up at once so we can sort of see the interrelationship between these. Structure, overall organisation. There are to be 3 spaces, 3 zones through which Dante will be passing: hell, purgatory, and heaven. That's how the cosmos is organised. Within each space, however, there are additional subdivisions. Hell is organised in terms of circles, and the circles themselves represent each of the mortal sins. So the principal mortal sin, for commission of which one has been consigned to hell, corresponds to the circle in which you, I don't mean you personally, I mean in which one is going to spend the afterlife in this system. You proceed through the circles as we follow Dante and Virgil down the spiral. That has its answering image as Dante and Virgil ascend in spiral shape up the terraces of purgatory. Here, in contrast to the mortal sins, which would have one consigned to hell, people work through and do penance for the venial sins, the ultimately forgivable sins, which may be classified the same way, but as I say, do not have permanent implications for the residence of one's immortal soul. Heaven, we move from earth to space. And this is organised along the classical idea of the spheres, each of which contained one of the heavenly bodies, the moon, the planets, the sun, and beyond, into ultimately the Empyrean. Divine love is the principle that has organised the cosmos in this fashion, and it is Dante the poet who has this organisation in view and composes the poem in order to give you access and understanding to this structure. He does so through a narrative, through describing a journey. That's the principle of organisation governing this narrative. And of course we encounter it as a poem divided into 3 canticles, each of which corresponds to one of the locations of the afterlife. Their titles, Inferno, Purgatorio, Paradiso. Each canticle is further subdivided into cantos, of which there are 33. They're like chapters, 33 in each of the canticles, with one bonus canto in the Inferno, so that the total number of cantos in the poem is 34, and in the total poem? 100, exactly. Nice round even number. Subdividing the cantos, the poem is organised into, or the lines of the poem are grouped into threes, referred to as tercets. So when you open your copy of the Divine Comedy, you see these groups of 3 lines. Overlaying that triple structure, there is a second triple structure, and that is the rhyme scheme, which was devised by Dante for this purpose, terza rima. I'll have another slide later which will help illustrate the terza rima. The figure who is at the centre of the narrative, I'm calling Dante the Pilgrim. That is, I'm drawing a distinction, a very classical distinction in discussions of the Divine Comedy between Dante the poet, who is writing the poem, and Dante the Pilgrim, the character who is experiencing, as it were, in real time, the events or the scenes of the narrative and reacting to them. Sometimes reacting to them in ways that Dante the poet would like us to judge as not ideal. This is something which, of course, you'll tease out in your individual sections. I just want to put the conceptual architecture in front of you. This might actually be an easier way to apprehend the structure of the cosmos through a diagram. Diagrams are great. There, at the very bottom of this one, is hell. As you proceed through the circles of hell, Dante and Virgil are in fact on the interior surface of that cone. At the very bottom of hell, they're at the centre of the earth, through which they pass and begin to climb and emerge at the other pole, at the foot of the mountain of purgatory. There, their spiral journey is on the exterior surface of the cone as they ascend the sequence of terraces. At the very top, they reach the earthly paradise, and from there out into the spheres of the various heavenly bodies, all the way up to the final vision of the Empyrean. A little note on why Earth should have this shape. What Dante and Virgil find at the very centre of the earth, at the lowest point in hell, is none other than the archangel Lucifer, henceforth Satan, the ultimate instance of every sin, pride and envy particularly. What's happened is that he has been expelled from heaven. You may know the great verses of Isaiah and the Gospel of Luke. I saw Satan fall like lightning, falls like lightning, hits the earth like a meteor, and his momentum pushes him all the way through to the centre of the earth. That impact, as every action has an equal and opposite reaction, causes, on the other side of the earth, the mountain of purgatory to emerge. The engineers in the audience will really appreciate the efficiency of this sort of construction. I mean, this is great. So that's reproduced on your handout. Along with it is this similar diagram of Mount Purgatory itself, which shows the various locations and what they correspond to conceptually. Purgatory is an island. You can see there it's sort of surrounded by waters. And so one arrives by boat, unless one has followed Virgil and Dante through the centre of the earth. And upon arrival, you spend time, as for any important appointment, in a waiting room, the Valley of the Princes. And thereafter, the soul ascends, working off, step by step, the venial sins in the following ascending order. So you read this diagram from the bottom up. Pride, envy, wrath, sloth, greed or avarice, gluttony and lust. These are the verses in which, about halfway through the Purgatorio, Virgil gives a very useful and memorable account of how purgatory is organised and why it is so organised. I think I've got time to read it out. Here's Virgil's account of purgatory's structure. Neither Creator nor his creatures ever, my son, lacked love. There are, as you well know, two kinds, the natural love, the rational. Natural love may never be at fault. The other may, by choosing the wrong goal, by insufficient or excessive zeal. While it is fixed on the eternal good and observes temperance, loving worldly goods, it cannot be the cause of sinful joys. But when it turns towards evil, or pursues some good with not enough or too much zeal, the creature turns on his Creator then. So in this account, the capital vices can be organised in terms of how the individual has directed their desire, their will. Desire is a good thing. Love makes the world go round. Divine love underpins the harmony of creation and of the cosmos. However, creatures may misdirect or misuse the desire that is immanent to them. And, as Virgil lays out, in three ways. Turned towards an improper or an evil goal. This gives us wrath, envy, and pride. It may be insufficient. That is, there is a duty to use one's capacity of will and desire. Failing to do so represents sloth. On the other hand, and perhaps more familiarly, it may be too excessive. Lust, gluttony, avarice. This is the beginning of the poem, and perhaps it might have been better to insert this a little bit earlier. The point here is to illustrate the terza rima part of Dante's art. You can see the coloured lines match up so that we have the organisation by tercets, by groups of 3 lines, and overlaid we have the terza rima structure, so oscura, dura, paura, forte, morte, scorte. Just to again make it intelligible as well, I've given an alternative translation. This is one of the many brave souls, Michael Palmer, who has attempted to render the terza rima structure in English. A rather difficult language in which to do it because end rhyme occurs much less naturally and frequently than it does in Italian. But there's his effort for comparison. Okay, I'm going to return to the poem, time permitting, and bring out a few more details which will be indicative of the sort of close reading that you will be pursuing in your individual sections. But I want to say a few brief words about Dante as a historical figure, deeply embedded in the political and cultural context of his time. Here's a map of modern Italy, but it's slightly deceptive to sort of use beige to colour the modern city-state, the modern nation-state. In Dante's time, the city-state was the principal political entity. And those to which Dante refers are illustrated on the second map there. Dante, as I said, goes through the absolutely formative and absolutely devastating experience of being legally exiled for life from Florence. This is something that he returns to really in all his works. I've just put up a couple of indicative quotes from a text where you might not imagine this autobiographical theme emerging so clearly. This is a text called De Vulgari Eloquentia, which is very beautiful in nature. It is an argument for artists and rhetoricians to use their native language, in his case, Tuscan, Italian. However, the text, as the title may indicate to you, is written in Latin, because that is the intellectual elite that he wants to reach. So it's a Latin argument for using Italian. Here are a couple of quotes that are representative of the sort of melancholy that affected Dante by virtue of his exile. To me, however, the whole world is a homeland, like the sea to fish. Okay, it's putting a good spin on it. Though I drank from the Arno, the river of Florence, before cutting my teeth, and loved Florence so much that, because I loved her, I suffer exile unjustly, and I will weight the balance of my judgment more with reason than with sentiment. That reference to love is something that might be worth ruminating in view of its importance to the organisation of the poem. A little later in the same text, was it not enough to correct you that, banished from the light of for your first transgression, you should live in exile from the delights of your homeland? You can see there the tone is rather melancholy. Here are some lines from the Inferno, where Dante injects a little bit more passion and a little bit more directness in talking about Florence. The context here, he's been through a great deal of the Inferno. He's seen a lot of hell. One very striking, and again, it's just representative of the panache of Dante as thinker and artist that he should do this. One of the things that he encounters is a whole bunch of people that he recognises from Florence. A whole bunch of Florentine politicians have turned up in hell. And this allows him to give the following memorable and impassioned harangue. Be joyful, Florence, since you are so great that your outstretched wings beat over land and sea, and your name is spread throughout the realm of hell. You should be proud of yourselves. Look how famous you are. I was ashamed to find among the thieves 5 of your most eminent citizens, a fact which does you very little honour. But if early morning dreams have any truth, you will have the fate, in not too long a time, that Prato and the others crave for you, and were this the day, it would not be too soon. Would it had come to pass, since pass it must. The longer the delay, the more my grief. You can see his rhetorical majesty here. He transitions out of that sarcasm of the opening tercet into really a tone that deserves to be called prophetic. In a sense, it is prophetic in the way that a literary text like Virgil's Aeneid is able to set its action, its narrative, in the past and take advantage of the gap between that past and the moment of writing to refer to events which have developed in the interim. So you can see how that works structurally. But there is also the tone of the prophet of the Old Testament haranguing the community for its laxity, for its sin. Having been exiled from Florence, Dante lived in various places in modern Italy, settling finally in Ravenna, where he had the advantage of a noble patron who was able to give him a livelihood. That was Can Grande. And this is a very useful text that Dante writes in the form of a letter to his patron. It's a text which sets out what I referred to earlier as a medieval theory of reading. And the theory is based on dividing the interpretation of texts into different levels. That is, you encounter one set of words on the page, and from it, one can read in, as he sets it out, 4 different modes. These modes he calls literal, allegorical, moral, anagogic. And he chooses a significant example in order to illustrate, for a reader not familiar with this system, how these levels work. I'll read this out. In order to make this manner of treatment clear, it can be applied to the following verses, and he quotes Psalm 114. When Israel went out of Egypt, the house of Jacob from a barbarous people, Judea was made his sanctuary, Israel his dominion. So this is a reference to the action of the biblical book of Exodus. If we look at the letter alone, the surface level, the literal level, what is signified to us is the departure of the sons of Israel from Egypt during the time of Moses. Fine, that's the story. If, at the allegory, what is signified to us is our redemption through Christ. Now, there's no hint of that at the literal level in this text. This is a form of reading, however, extremely influential, called typology. I've supplied the word there in blue. This is the technique of finding in the narrative, the images, in the structures of the Hebrew Bible, anticipations, echoes, allegories of Christian theology and the coming of Christ. So this is typological reading, very significant mode of literary engagement in the Middle Ages and later. If at the moral sense, what is signified to us is the conversion of the soul from the sorrow and misery of sin to the state of grace. So we've completely left behind Moses as a character, the historical events of the Exodus. From that, we have abstracted a moral story, a movement from sin, representing the captivity, to grace, representing the return. Finally, if at the anagogic, what is signified to us is the departure of the sanctified soul from bondage to the corruption of this world, earthly life, into the freedom of eternal glory. Of course, the ultimate stakes for the Divine Comedy itself. So this is, a system that you don't want to apply mechanistically to a text, and you certainly don't want it to replace your own engagement as a modern reader of Dante's text. However, it is very useful to, as an experiment or as an exercise, see if you can apply this system of levels to the text you encounter. I particularly like that passage from the letter of Can Grande, given the selections that you are reading, because references to the Exodus crop up in the Purgatorio itself. Here are a couple of illustrations of the moment in one of the very early cantos where a boat of fresh souls arrives on the shore where Dante and Virgil have just emerged. There's a rather unfinished Blake watercolour there, and also a watercolour by Dali. What's happening? Well, they're singing the very hymn about the Exodus that was referred to in Dante's letter. So his references to the moral level of this story about the passage of souls is here made into the literal level of his poem. Souls are making this aquatic passage to the shores of Mount Purgatory. If you read the Purgatorio, you'll see a lot of references to singing, a lot of hymn making, indicative perhaps of the principle of harmony organising the cosmos. But there are some good examples, something to watch out for in your discussions. They disembark from the boat, and Dante, as is the familiar pattern of this poem, recognises a Florentine. And the Florentine starts talking to him with another reference to the Exodus. And moreover, a reference to Anchises' son, who is Aeneas. Virgil's right there again. The classical and the Christian are both kept in play at all times. As time is running out, I'm not going to dwell on this next passage as much as it deserves, but I want to commend it to your attention. I spoke earlier about how Virgil explicates, how he explains the structure of purgatory in terms of desire, the direction of the will. That's how the categories of venial sin are organised. The question that arises inevitably out of this is, well, if the will is at fault, is that really my fault as an individual? Am I free to exercise my will? Marco, a character that Virgil and Dante encounter and who makes an important series of contributions to the narrative, in Canto 16 says yes. I'll leave you to annotate the reference here. It's Canto 16, lines 73 to 81. And discuss these more fully in your individual sections. But here you have a great moment where the key philosophical issues, which you've been following throughout this semester because they have exercised all of the writers and thinkers represented on our curriculum, is synthesised with the theological system which Dante is presenting. There's an image that I'll just sort of leave to have a suggestive impact upon you. I said Beatrice is going to have to be left for your discussion sections, but there she is. Remember this image and you'll recognise it when you encounter in your readings the relevant moment. So, we have really reached the end. Thank you very much.